Hey folks, it is January the 5th, 2021, and this is our first day back for our U.S. history course, high school U.S. history course after Christmas break. Hope you had a good break. And today we're going to talk about World War II, how it's going to end in the Pacific. Where we left off last time, we were talking about how the Allies had finally made it to Berlin. And we talked about the death of Hitler. And we talked about the Nazi surrender there. However, now we're going to move on and talk about the war still going on against the Japanese in the Pacific. And so, even though the war was essentially over for our European allies and enemies, there's still going to be quite a bit of very intense fighting. Because if you recall, the whole reason the U.S. got involved in the war in the first place was because of Pearl Harbor. And so our initial enemy in this war is also going to be our last enemy. So, though we didn't talk much about it, one of the most distinctive features of World War II was the use of concentration camps, especially by our enemies, people such as the Nazis, and of course, done by the Japanese too. And so the concentration camps were different ones were categorized. The civilian camps were often used for two purposes. Slave labor was one. So a lot of people were forced to work in order to make war supplies for the Nazis. However, also it was extermination. And of course, the Nazis were very well known for their brutality. First choosing to execute children, babies, mothers, things of that nature, people who were disabled and elderly. They would choose people based on their religion, as we know, a lot of Jewish people, and of course, dissenting Catholics, also people who were gay, people who were just deemed to be inferior. Now, POWs, however, who were not civilians, it kind of depended what country you were from. If you're from the United States, you had a really hard time, and many of them faced starvation. But the Nazis would let them get care packages from home. Of course, they'd rifle through it, make sure there wasn't contraband in it, like stuff they weren't supposed to have. But they could actually get things like from the Red Cross. They could get medicine or some food. However, some people, like if they were like a Soviet POW, they got nothing. And so many of them would resort to eating grass and stuff like that. So super, super hard stuff. Whenever the U.S. troops would move through and start liberating concentration camps, the lead general who, for American forces there, Dwight D. Eisenhower, would make his soldiers walk in front of these people and look at them because they believed that it was so crazy, the starvation that they went through and the hardships, that nobody back home would believe it, because the Holocaust, like nothing like that had been done in modern times. And so they would walk by the stacks of starved to death people, the ovens they would use to cook people to death, and just these poor scarecrow people looking at them in desperation. And there's people today who believe it didn't happen. So there's conspiracy theorists out there. So moving on, our first line of the year. Though Americans celebrated the victory in Europe, the war was still fully active against Japan. The Japanese strategy was to force the U.S. into invading a nearly innumerable amount of heavily fortified islands while losing massive numbers of troops and equipment. So the Japanese would set up these little small, essentially you could think of just dug in trenches and forts and tunnels where they would have machine guns and explosives and booby traps and all these things set up to where they knew if the Americans wanted to take every island, they would just chew them up over and over and over. And we would eventually cave in because we would just get tired of losing so many soldiers and Marines. However, American war planners realized that we really only needed some of these islands, the most important ones, and we could skip the others. And so by skipping these others, we could isolate them where they couldn't get supplies and they couldn't get out. And so you'd have these Japanese soldiers just stuck there. And because we skipped over them and pressed on, they couldn't get their boats to give them supplies or get them out. Their airplanes couldn't pass through because we'd shoot them down. And we wouldn't even have to lose soldiers taking them. So it's pretty smart. Only fight the battles you have to. As General MacArthur, he was the general who was in charge of U.S. forces in the areas of the Philippines when the Japanese came in and conquered. And he swore he would return. Well, he's coming back as one of the main leaders against Japan. As he continued to push through the northern coast of New Guinea, the Navy and Marines continued to take Solomon Islands. So you have two major fronts. You have one that's the Navy and the Army, and another one that's the Navy and the Marines. One's coming from the south, one's coming more north as they're pushing on towards Japan. By 1944, MacArthur was ready to take the Philippines, while the Navy and Marines were establishing footholds in the Marshall and the Gilbert Islands. So both are moving together, taking a lot of this territory. Much of this land had been taken for years by the Japanese. They had a long time to prepare. And one thing about the Japanese is they were just as smart and they fought just as hard as the Nazis. However, we're going to see that the Japanese are willing to fight to the death, whereas the Nazis, when they were losing, they would usually at least give up. We're going to see here with the Japanese, they don't care if they die, and that makes them very dangerous. You ready to move on? Or you need to stay? Okay. Okay. So here we have some U.S. Marines getting like on a rather calm shore, coming to an island. There's not that like there's some remastered photos that have been made in color since then. It's kind of thing some people do. A lot of these islands in the Pacific are desert islands. And by that we mean like they literally are just like sand sticking out of the ocean, you know. Some of them have some more hilly mountainous material. Some of them have jungles on them. And so it's really tough getting onto each one. And so there's not a lot on the land for like, especially the desert islands, whenever our troops would get off the beach, there was nowhere to hide from bullets. And so you had the Japanese there. They already know the land. They already have their weapons pointed in different sectors of fire where they know they can control it. And so it was like a mini D-Day over and over again as these soldiers and Marines would get off the boats and go try to take these islands. And as they fought their way through, of course, like I said, they could find booby traps. They could get hit with artillery, which are cannons that fire explosive material, and mortars, which do the same thing. Devastating machine guns. And whenever they would use these giant cannons on our battleships to bombard and our bombers to bombard these islands, well, they had dug in so well it didn't have much of an effect. And so to counter this, you would see the introduction of new inventions like flamethrowers to try to cook them out of these tunnels and stuff. So it was very brutal warfare, you know. November of 1943, U.S. Marines overcame 5,000 well-entrenched Japanese soldiers. So entrenched means they're dug in, they're protected by either concrete or earth, sandbags, things that absorb bullets and explosions very well. These soldiers fought to the death, nearly to a man. That means almost every one of them fought to the death. The Japanese had propaganda that told them, well, two things. One, cowardice is worse than death. And that's just part of their culture. And the second thing is that the Americans were monsters. They're like if they surrendered, they were going to be tortured to death. And just like all kinds of inhumane things would happen to them anyway. So they might as well die with honor. So this is while the Marines took 3,000 casualties. If you recall, a casualty in warfare doesn't necessarily mean you die. It means somebody is rendered incapable of fighting. So these are like serious injuries and, of course, death put together. But that's a lot of people. Like nowadays, they consider it a disaster. Like say if 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 people are casualties in the U.S. military in a battle. But this must have been so high, so high. I don't know what the number of Marines and soldiers who fought here, but 3,000 take out 5,000. That's pretty tough odds. At Saipan, the Japanese defenders included around 22,000 civilians, not soldiers, who expended all of their ammo and chose suicide over surrender. So even the Japanese civilians were willing to take up arms and fight to the death. This was something that was very telling to U.S. war planners and also to our politicians that if we go to Japan, even the people there would wind up fighting this hard. And so, well, it's pretty intimidating. The U.S. forces then established airfields on the newly acquired islands of Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. With these airfields, long range B 29 bombers began air raids over Japan. So we had aircraft carriers. And aircraft carriers are boats that fighter pilots can land and take off on. But they were too small for bombers. Bombers needed a long runway. And so now finally the US had islands that were close enough to the main Japanese islands so we could ship in some of our bombers and start actually bombing Japan, like trying to bomb their factories and their bases and try to like bring the war home to them. By October of 1944, American troops landed in the center of the Philippines. And if you recall, the Philippines were a place that was supposed to be protected by the U.S. following when we tried to liberate it during the Spanish-American War. Now, there were some problems after the Spanish-American War in the Philippines where we tried to make sure that they had a government installed that was friendly to us. We put down a couple of uprisings. It did get a little violent, but when the Japanese occupied it, the Japanese people were extremely brutal to the Philippine people. They would torture people to death for fun. There was a lot of rapes, murders. They would enslave people. As one thing about Japanese ideology, it was very similar to Nazi ideas. They believed in racial supremacy, but more with an Asian bent. So instead of blaming everything on the Jews and stuff like that, and thinking that Germans were superior people, they thought Japanese were superior people to other Asians. So, the Japanese attempted to halt the invasion of the Philippines in the largest naval battle in history, in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. So here it's not only like the largest naval, it's like the largest modern naval battle, I guess you could say. Like I don't know if other naval battles were bigger, like Battle of Lepanto or something like that, but so this is like a really, really big thing. This is like we got to stop America now, or it's all lost. Because the Philippines are like southwest of Japan, but it's also the Philippines. I think is made up of like several hundred islands. I've forgotten how many. It's like a lot of islands. Like Japan's made up of quite a few islands too, not even that many. But they knew that it was still a big chunk of land, and it was really close to Japan. And the last thing they wanted to do is have the Americans get a big piece of land so close to their home country, especially when they're retreating the whole way. They're constantly losing ground. They knew they were losing the war. Their only hope was to try to stall us and get Japan so defensible we could never take it. Of course, they didn't know about the A-bomb yet either. All right.
Oh.
Yeah, here we see a new tactic the Japanese are going to make out of desperation. And these are called kamikaze pilots. They're going to essentially take airplanes and they're not even really going to put weapons or anything in them.
They just died right in and did like suicide bomb.
Yeah, but they would fill it with explosives
I
too.
heard that they took meth before they actually started flying, so they don't have to feel the pain.
I think
it's proven in the National Geographic. It's like before they took flight, they took meth, and that's how meth started.
well, I know there's like stimulants that I I know, like even today, fighter pilots sometimes they'll take some kind of stimulants to keep them awake for a long time. But yeah, I can believe it. I mean, they're going to, especially since they're like trying to make them go on a one-way trip. They didn't even put enough fuel in
It's
them
funny
to
because they
return
don't
home.
really have much effect on it because the carriers are just steel. And the plane's
Yeah.
just like it's like some weak metal, whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. They these pilots were usually like poorly trained. They're like the new guys,
Yeah.
like the young guys are like, hey, here's how you fly it. No, we're not going to teach you how to land. And so give them a little bit of time in there. They wouldn't get enough fuel to return home. And yeah, they didn't really do that much damage. A lot of them got shot out of the air, but it scared everybody. Like people were scared to death. People were willing to like fly bombs. Like nobody
I
ever
know
heard
for
of
the-
suicide bombers.
I know for the new guys, I know they were the gunners because the gunners they're out open behind the plane
Mm-hmm.
and making like because the plane's just like tailgating them, and then they're the gunners, so they're going to be an open target. So that's
Yeah.
why the new guys they want to get killed first because they're just right there.
Oh yeah, bomber pilots, yeah, and the gunners and the guys on those ones, yeah, that was a tough job.
That's why they say like, when you, are you the new guy? And then like they don't say nothing after that.
Yeah. Note to self, don't say I'm negative. And so, war in the Pacific, the Battle of Lake Gulf, the American Navy broke the remaining elements of the Japanese naval and air power. So this is going to be a resounding victory for Americans, and it's going to show that we got the end of this. By the spring of 1945, U.S. forces assaulted Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These are like really close to Japan. Japan turned to a new weapon, the kamikaze, which loaded fighter planes with explosives while pilots suicide dived into U.S. naval ships. As U.S. Marines assaulted Iwo Jima, nearly 21,000 Japanese soldiers fought to the death, while causing the Americans to lose 1/3 of the invading forces. So 7,000 dead and 20,000 Americans injured. So 1/3 of the forces. Remember, I told you 1/10 now is seen as like a tragedy. So this is a very hard-fought war. So that's one thing about the older generation wars compared to like modern wars, right? So is that the losses then were very heavy. Of course, another thing too, though, is that this is what you call like near peer powers. So you have two militaries that are really their technology and their fighting tactics and their numbers are almost equal battle to battle. And so you're going to have heavy losses. In the assault of Okinawa, things were worse. Japan mobilized 900 kamikazes against the Navy. By the time Okinawa fell, 12,000 American soldiers, 110,000 Japanese, and 160,000 civilians died. So these are extremely deadly battles, and this is true throughout like so much of history. It's usually the civilians, it's the non-war fighters who get hurt the most in war. It's the same back in ancient times, it's the same today. It's one of those things that we don't really think about. But these are, of course, people caught in the crossfire. These are people who are held captive and they're bombed with the enemies. These are people who have nowhere to run. So it's really tough, really tough. Your phone, why are you beeping? Hey, what's that?
Oh.
What do you think it is?
It's the A bomb. It's a water tank.
Yeah, you're right. It's an A
It's a
bomb.
septic tank, there we go.
Yo.
I mean, I think something called heavy water is used in
How does it detonate?
Okay, so it's got like a core in the middle that's like this like depleted, I think like uranium.
It's the earth.
And so what they do is you got this ball of it, and it's super dense material.
It's a cord.
And then so it's inside of a ball, and on the ball there's explosives all around it. And the whole point is you're supposed to make all these explosives go off at the same time, and it builds so much pressure on that core that it just can't hold together anymore, and the atom just kind of cracks and releases all this energy.
How do they make it?
I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. I mean, like, I'm sure with great difficulty, but yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it took like scientists from all around the world. It was a very expensive project for the time too. So this was, and it was one of those things that people didn't think was possible. Really, it was beyond a lot of people's imaginations to think of that one bomb could be that destructive. So the nuclear age begins. The number of casualties was astonishing to the U.S. So like I told you, it's like we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of people dying just in one battle. They're like, what? So something has to be done. It was drastic measures needed to be taken. This led many planners to indicate that taking Japan could cost 1 million American lives, and who knows how many of theirs. As we've seen, they lost more of their people than us. There could be millions of people dying. That seemed very, very bad. The atomic bomb was an enticing answer to this dilemma. The Manhattan Project, which is the official name of the project that built the bomb, began in 1941 and had produced a new type of bomb involving plutonium and uranium to create a massive explosion through a controlled chain reaction. Teams of scientists under the leadership of J.R. Oppenheimer and Edward Teller conducted this $2 billion research project in secret until their first successful detonation in 1945. And that's back then money too, so it's probably more like a couple of $1 trillion or something for all that. So, yeah, super expensive. And these guys, I know Ed Teller for sure, he's going to continue on to make even bigger, better, scarier nuclear weapons later. So. Firecrackers. The news of this testing reached Truman as he was, remember, Truman's now president. I should have mentioned this. FDR is going to die of a heart attack while in office. He's not going to fill out his fourth term, and his vice president, Truman, will become the president. And it's all during the war, too. So Truman was meeting with Churchill and Stalin. He got news that this thing worked out. And U.S. troops were just outside. Well, this is after Berlin fell, too. So we found out we got the bomb. He hears about it. He's like, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do?
Use it on a random country.
Be terrible.
You sound like a roulette of like many countries and just spin the wheel.
Hmm.
Just like,
Nah.
oh, it's Japan.
Well, we were at war with them.
I know. What's it? It's Japan. We should use it on
Let's see. Let's go to the next one. Hey, you know what that is? It's still there
it's just
today.
like the after effect of the bomb. It's like what they're like. There's these people, some say if like a person's walking and then they get blasted by the bomb, their shadow or their ash will be stuck on the surface wherever it landed on.
Yeah, it's an atomic shadow.
Yeah, so right here, probably the girls are jumping over the jump rope, maybe. And this is really sad.
It is sad. Yeah, my wife actually went to the Atomic Museum. I think in it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki,
It's like the December.
I think so.
and she said there was like this big red ball hanging from a tall ceiling, showing exactly where the bomb went off, and they had a whole bunch of like pictures and stuff from when the atomic bomb went off and stuff. But these shadows are still there today. What it is that this is actually the original color of the area. All of this got bleached because when the blast happened, it made such a super intense bright light, it bleached everything that wasn't covered. And so in an instant, yeah, this poor child was just evaporated.
Right, so it's been,
Yes, Matt.
so it's been all bleached by the,
This was all bleached, but yeah, this is where she was in front of it, and basically her shadow shielded it from this just like super, kind of like if you leave something in the sun, like some kid toy, like out in the sun for years, it just gets brittle and kind of fades. Yeah, it's kind of like it did that in an instant, just went faded. But she was in the way for like a split second. Yeah, tough. Pretty much, yeah. That's crazy. So, Truman wished to keep this new weapon secret. The Soviet spies had already told Stalin about it and used it on Japan in order to end the war without invasion. Truman then released the Potsdam Declaration in July of 1945, where he demanded Japan's unconditional surrender. He said, "Japan, you need to surrender right now or else." And they're like, "Or else what?" So Japan, not knowing about the bomb, begged Russia, Joseph Stalin, to act as a middleman and negotiate peace on an even playing field. But they didn't know that Stalin was actually on our side on this one. And Truman had secretly convinced them to back us in taking over Japan. Following Japan's rejection of the Potsdam Declaration, Truman ordered the use of the atomic bomb. 9:15 a.m., August the 6th, 1945, the B-29 bomber known as the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb over Hiroshima, home of 250,000 people. So, it's a civilian city, but it was also an industrial city, right? So they're like, well, we want to stop their war production. So,
What they did?
oh, yeah, I did. So no good stuff out of that. So thing is, there's a lot of things we didn't know about atomic bombs either. Didn't know that much about radiation poisoning and cancer, and like just like the long-lasting effects of radiation on an area, which was largely cleaned up. It's supposed to be a safe place to live now, but tough stuff. Yeah, don't worry. There's no like mutants running around or something like that.
People live there now.
Well,
Yeah.
people actually get mutated? I mean, like, the survivors?
Well, I mean, like,
Deformity or something like that?
not. I never heard of things like birth defects there, but some places like Chernobyl, where a nuclear power plant meltdown, there were a lot of like initially. There were some like fetal deformities and stuff like that. Children who couldn't make it, But the thing is about nuclear material is it changes rapidly. It has.
I thought it changed like over time.
It does. It goes from one to another through its half-lives.
Like when the first creation of the what is it? Mercury? Was it Mercury? Whatever. Like what they use for like the watches when so the soldiers can see at night.
Oh, what was it like? I know nowadays we use something called
that took over
tritium.
time. That took over time, and there was like a lot of radiation.
Yeah, that's the thing. All radioactive things glow in the dark, and things that glow in the dark are at least mildly radioactive. That doesn't mean it's unsafe, because there's a lot of radioactive material that can't even penetrate your skin, right? Like the stuff we use on glow in the dark junk or chem lights. It can't penetrate your skin, so it's safe. But yeah, there's some things it's just like
those old monitors. Those have mercury in it, right?
Yeah,
Those are radioactive, isn't there?
they're poisonous.
Poisonous.
It can enter your pores and it can poison you really quickly and get to your brain and cause all kinds of bad problems. But people used to use mercury medicinally.
Yeah, they use it for, this is also only for fingernails. And then, no,
Yeah.
lips. Okay.
Let's see here. We're almost done. I think we got a couple more. All right. So as you see, the bombs went off and they were just nasty. So it was the first one.
You know,
I think this was the second bomb from Nagasaki
second bomb.
because there's going to be a
This reminds
second.
me of the Twilight Zone of when that guy, like, he dropped his, like,
Oh.
glasses broke and, like, he, like,
Yeah, that was sad.
yeah, it was, I was like, damn, I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, I haven't watched a lot of Twilight Zone, so I don't think I've seen that one.
That's sort of just.
The war ends. Nearly 100,000 Japanese people died in the initial explosion. Another 100,000 would perish from the radiation. Again, Japan asked the Soviets to help them make peace with the Americans. Instead, Stalin responded by declaring war on Japan and invading Manchuria. So, if you recall, Japan had, before the war with us, invaded China and took over a part of China called Manchuria. Stalin wanted to have control of this property, at least for a little while. And at the same time, it was put off by the Second World War, but there was also a communist revolution that was put on hold, led by a man named Mao Zedong in China. And he was going to take over part of Manchuria to help them out later. You know, because just communists helping communists. On August 9th, 1945, the Americans launched the second and last atomic bomb used in warfare in the city of Nagasaki. This blast killed nearly 60,000 people and forced Emperor Hirohito to make the final decision and surrender. See, the Japanese emperor was always held in super high esteem, like religious esteem. And most Japanese people had a picture of him in their home. They held with reverence, and they never heard his voice before. And he's going to make a public radio announcement to end the war. And this is going to totally blow away the Japanese people. But because of their reverence for the emperor, they're going to do it. And it's going to be a very peaceful surrender, despite how violent the war was. And it's going to be very unique compared to a lot of other nations throughout the world. On August 14th, 1945, this would end World War II. Japan surrendered, while the U.S. agreed to leave the emperor in his position. We would also build some bases there. We'd help out with a lot of the reconstruction. Of course, we're going to help out with the Germans with a lot of their reconstruction as well. Some of this is going to be based on the idea of preventing people from being embittered and being our enemies later, but also it's going to lead to the Cold War, because we're going to see that if we don't help people out, the Soviets will, and then we'll lose the Cold War and could face bad things from that. So it's going to end our lecture for today. Meet back on Thursday. We will have class next week. Yeah. So this is an A week. So it's Friday. This Friday is an A day. Next week's going to be a B day. All right. See you later. So yeah, they put